It's about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hello, my name is Leandro Facchinetti, and we'll write some code together. That's what we are gonna do today. And this is where we are at. In case you're new here, as a way of introduction, hello, it's nice to have you here. We are working on real-time audio effects for Reaper. You can think of things like equalizers and compressors and so forth. And we are focusing particularly on the user interface, being able to show what the effect is doing to the audio. That's my main goal with my effects. That's why I want to do audio effects. And an important thing for many types of effects like compressors is to show what it's doing to the waveform. So we have been working for quite a while at this point on this little widget as part of our library. That this little widget will show the waveform as audio is running through the effect. Right now, we have the scrolling display working. We have some features like you can take the square root of the sample to sort of redistribute the waveform over the space that it occupies. And today we are going to, as the title of this stream says, we're going to fill in the details. This is like the 25th version of this component. There are previous versions with more features, and we are going to fill in the details. We are going to fill in the features that are missing on this version of the waveform display. To begin with, one thing that we have not done in any of the previous versions, and I think it would be nice to do to this one, because I am pretty confident that this one is the one that is going to stand. This version is really good. So one thing that I'm missing from this component is a grid. So let me pull in the Cocos oscilloscope to show what I mean. So you see how on the background here, it has some faint lines in gray, and it is showing the dB and I guess in this case, the sample number, but also the time point. That's the kind of grid that I'm talking about. So probably we're going to spend the whole session today just implementing this grid. If we have extra time, we will bring some of the previous features we used to have. So I guess the first thing about the grid is the horizontal lines. So the dB, that's probably the most important one. But it seems to me to be more difficult to do than the vertical lines that are just the passing of time. So we're going to start with what's hopefully going to be easy, we'll see, and try to draw the vertical lines. This is the implementation that we currently have. It fits on one screen. Isn't that amazing? Our previous implementations were a lot longer. And this one is not only shorter, but it's also simpler and it works better. Awesome. So I guess we are going to add more parameters to the function. We have the waveform data structure, the position where you want to draw stuff, the duration that you are drawing, whether you want to square root, whether you want the thing to be vertical as opposed to horizontal, and then the colors. We are adding the grid. So we can give you granular control over the grid if you just want to have horizontal lines or if you want to have vertical lines as well. the colors of them. But yeah, we'll have to think about which options we want to give. Hey, I am good. Thanks for being here, Tail. The waveform is looking good. It is, isn't it? It is. It's looking great. It is scrolling by as smoothly as I can. The frame rate is good. The CPU consumption is okay. It's not flickering. It's not glitching. In fact, this channel is the same as this one because my microphone is mono, but this is actually stereo. It's looking at the left and right channels. So yeah, it is looking good. I think that all the obsession over the course of months is paying off. And it turns out that the thing that works is just the simplest thing. Just redraw. Don't draw to off-screen canvases. Don't do crazy stuff with bleeding. No, just repaint on every frame. Who would guess? Anyways, for now, I will not even worry about what kinds of controls I want to give to the user. I will just hard code some values in here. And I want to do the drawing of the grid before I do the drawing of the waveform itself, which happens on this section, this block, this loop. And the reason for that is that the order of things on the screen, so if you draw through two things that overlap, the one that you draw later is going to be on top. Makes sense, right? When you're drawing on paper, that's how things work. So we want to draw the grid below the waveform. There is a case to be made about drawing the grid above the waveform in case you want the grid to be visible even when the waveform is going. But I think it can be a bit noisy. In fact, in the waveforms that you see in Reaper, so when you record, you'll see a waveform display here. And on this one, there is an option in Reaper that by default is turned off, and I have that default. But you can go into the settings and say that you want the grid line to go over the waveform. So it's possible. It's just not something that Reaper that by default doesn't do it, and I guess I won't either. So I would make things simple, and perhaps we could have an option for this, but I will not. I would just draw the grid below the waveform. And Andres is here. Hello, great to have you here. All right, so let's start simple. You can, if you want, draw the waveform with different durations, but right now I have 5 seconds set here. So this point takes 5 seconds to go all the way to the left. Similarly, it takes 5 seconds to go from top to bottom. So let's start simple and just draw lines on every second. How are we going to do that? Well, the duration is given to us in milliseconds, and we want to draw one line every second. So I guess we are going to take the duration in milliseconds, then divide by 1000. This is going to give us the duration in seconds. Perhaps we could have an auxiliary function to convert from milliseconds to seconds in case you don't know how to do that by dividing and multiplying by 1000. It's kind of trivial, but it's also kind of annoying. I always have to double think, or I always have to think twice. Do I want to divide or multiply by 1000? And currently we don't have such a helper function. I won't bother with that now. So that will give me a number that may be fractional. And now I have a number that is guaranteed to be an integer. So I can loop that number of times. And what do I do in the body of the loop? Well, I will have to draw the lines, and I guess it makes sense to go from right to left, which is from 0 seconds to 5 seconds. So I will have a new variable here where, how do I call this variable? Ooh. I was gonna call it something like grid X, but I think I should call it grid main, the same way that we have line main. And we have this notion of main and cross that we introduced yesterday to try and simplify the code that has to do with vertical drawing. So instead of calling this the width and calling this axis the x-axis, I'm calling this axis the main axis, and the width is just the length of the main axis, so that when you want to draw vertically, I just swap what is main. It's now no longer x, it's y. But then the rest of the code remains the same. So perhaps it will make sense for me to do first all this setup, because then I will have the information I need in terms of main and cross, and then I will draw the grid. So this is going to give me the number of lines that I want to draw. Now let's try to position these lines in a way that makes sense both for main being y as well as for main being x. And we'll start with this because this is the horizontal display, which is easier for me to think about. Right, so we will introduce this grid main situation. And this variable will come right below line main. Well, I guess it will come above, because I think that I have a feeling that the grid main will be different for vertical and notch. If it is the same, then I will pull it out again. But I have them. Yeah, I have an intuition that tells me that we are going to do this differently. So we'll probably have a line here as well. And grid main will come here. Okay, so for now, I will just say to do here, but on this one, the main axis is this one. Where do I want my first line to be? I want it to be right here. So it is main plus main length. Then, how do I want to change? I want the grid main to go to the left. So that's why I'm subtracting. And by how much? Well, for that I need to know how wide is the gap between two consecutive lines. And in this case, it's 5 seconds and it is 300 pixels. So it will have to traverse 300 pixels in 5 seconds. I expect to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I expect to have 6 lines. Not 7. 6 lines. Oh, and I guess I want one more, right? Because I want 0 seconds to show up as well. And then we have to determine what is the grid, I'm going to say gap. And this is the gap on the main axis, because we will have, we will have also the other axis, the dB axis later. So that will have a different gap. And this gap it should be given in pixels. Well, we have the main length. And we need to know how many grid lines to have, and that's this number right here. So I guess we will need to extract that. Grid main lines, the number of lines. except that I have to subtract 1 here, because how many lines will I have? Well, I will have 6, as we determined before, from 0 to 5, so we'll have 6 lines. But that means we'll have 5 gaps. So take the whole length of the whole thing and divide by the number of lines minus 1, and that's the number of gaps, and that will give you the length of a gap. This computation will only work if the number of lines is an exact multiple, and it happens to be, so I'll not worry about this edge case right now, but it will, there is a bug in here and we'll have to revisit this. In fact, I will leave a fix me here. Treat the case of non-integer number of lines. Of course, we are taking the floor here, so it will be this number will be an integer, but we have to think about the case where this computation is not an integer. We'll get to that later. How many times do we want to loop? This many times. How much do we want the grid to go to the left by? By this much. All right, now we can take a color. And for now, let's do... Later, we'll have this as an argument. For now, we'll do blue 500, so it stands out. And then I want to go on the x-axis. I want this to be a vertical line. So in the x-axis, I will not add... on the x-axis, I will give this same value. So if I'm not changing the value on the x-axis, I will have a vertical line. Then on the y-axis, I want to go from, I guess, just cross. And I want it to go to the bottom of the thing, so I will just do cross plus cross length, which is another way of saying y down to y plus height. Okay, that should do. And here we have our blue lines, and we have 6 of them. It can be a little hard to see this one, but it's there. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hang on, yeah, that's correct. We have 6 lines, 0 to 5. So let's commit what we have, because we made progress. But how about this vertical one? Let's make this one work as well. The main thing that changes, we have to change these computations, these 3, and then we have to change this loop as well. Let's start with the computation. Right, so in the grid main, it's still going to be the time. But this time we don't want to go to the bottom, so that's what's different. We want to start at the top. 0 seconds is at the top. So we just start there. See how it's different? I told you it was going to be different. I had an intuition for that. Then the number of lines that we'll have, that is actually the same. So we can pull this up. I have an intuition that this is going to come back to bite me, because I think that the number of lines that I have will be dependent on the height, as soon as I don't want these numbers to be fixed anymore. But for now, it is the same. So I'll pull this up, and I'll pull this up as well. I'm trying to keep the list. It doesn't really matter. The code is going to work the same, but I think it reads better if the declaration of the local variables matches the occurrence of them the order in which they occur in the body of the code. So that's why I'm taking the care of reordering this. All right, so how about the gap? The gap will be the length of the main divided. Yeah, so this one is also the same. But the issue is that I have to have computed this already. So they are the same, but they need to go to the bottom. Like this. And perhaps it would be better to just repeat this, even if they are the same, because it can be annoying to read the thing in this order. Maybe I'm doing premature refactoring, I guess. Whatever. But with this in place, there is a chance that we have the correct values here. So let's just check if we want to do vertical. And what will be different here is now we want the y-axis, we want this line to be horizontal. So the y-axis needs to be a single value, and that value needs to be grid main. Now we need to think about what to put here. Well, we want to go from left to right, so I guess that's cross. And this is cross plus cross length. And you gotta love how there is a correspondence between these two lines. Really cute. So with that, oops, syntax error. We should be able, we are not, but we should be able to see lines on the horizontal one as well. Let's see why we are having this error. Line 18, 17. That's this line. Oh, this semicolon shouldn't be there. That's what's up. All right, no blue lines. So what's up with that? But the blue lines still appear here, so it gives me an indication that probably the mistake is in here somewhere. I'm going to start poking around, so I'm going to commit what I have. This is just some reordering, no big deal. Oh, wait a second. I see something. There is a line there. Do I have any local variables that are leaking? Waveform left and right. No, we don't have any variables that are leaking. When I say leaking, we have this notion of local variables. They are local to the body of this function. Sometimes if you have a typo or if you forget to include something here, a variable may be, if it's not declared here as local, by default, it's global. And if you have global variables, they may lead to problems under certain situations. But those situations usually have to do with a function being called on the audio thread as well as on the user interface thread at the same time. Not the case here, because this is only a user interface thing, but still, it's always worth checking. Yikes. So what could be going wrong? I guess one way to know this is to look at the values that we have on these three variables. We care about this, the cross, the grid main, and the cross length. And what I'm doing here is a way to inspect into the variables. Except that this is in a loop. So I think that these values are going to be the last values in the loop. Oh, but it doesn't really matter because these variables don't change in the loop. So I might as well do it here. And then the variables are outside the loop. That should be better. We'll see. 200, 200, 300. The values make sense. Sometimes the values don't make sense. For instance, sometimes the values are like between 0 and 1, and then you know that you have a sample as opposed to a coordinate, for instance. That's something that sometimes happens. But the values are like 200 and 300, so those are definitely coordinates. They're positions on the screen. They're pixels. Let's check this. And we expect that to be the number 6. And it is, because we are drawing 6 lines. So that's why I expected the number to be the number 6. Okay, so that's not the issue. Oh, hang on. When we are drawing vertically, we want to go down. So when we are drawing horizontally, we want to go to the left. When we are drawing vertically, we want to go down. So we don't want to subtract. There you go. This is looking good. Now, perhaps it's time for me to address this situation. To address that, I think I'm going to do the following. I'm going to add a slider, which can be slider 1, and that can be the duration, which right now we are hard coding as 5,000. Let's say that it can go down to 300 milliseconds up to I guess 10 seconds perhaps, in steps of 1 millisecond. No, who wants that kind of step? 100 milliseconds should do for the steps. And this is the duration in milliseconds. And this is actually the first time we are going to play around with this, with changing the duration on this new implementation. So it may explode. But it works. It doesn't explode, at least. Awesome. isn't that a relief? And the coolest thing is that I don't know if it's cool or if it's not desirable really. The truth of the matter is that I don't expect you to be changing the duration of the waveform display too often in your plugins. You probably will find something that makes sense, like when you have a compressor, then you will find that 5 seconds makes sense and you will scroll 5 seconds around and that will be that. But perhaps you want to have this as something that the user can select. And if that's the case, there's something that is a kind of an odd behavior. It is a consequence of the way that we implemented the waveforms. And the odd behavior is, you will notice that as I perhaps make this faster, or maybe I'll make it slower. As I make this slower, you will see that the old samples still represent the old rate, and the new samples represent the new rate. But it still scrolls by. So right now, this chunk, for instance, represents, let's say, 3 seconds worth of audio. And when I do this, it now represents more than the grid says. So the grid adapts too fast with respect to the samples that are already there. It is what it is. I'm not going to bother with this too much, but it is a consequence, and it's pretty much unavoidable given the way that we implemented the waveform display. So perhaps what I could do is just reset. When you change the duration, I would erase the whole thing. That's something to consider actually, but yeah, it is what it is. But at least it's not exploding. So if you do this and then ignore all the samples from where my cursor is to the left, just ignore them, then the rest makes sense. This point is gonna take almost 10 seconds to scroll across. All right, so that's what we have so far. And it seems like this is behaving correctly. If I have 10 here, I expect to see 10 seconds. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great. All right, I now have to start thinking about the granularity here. Because if your duration is small, like this, you may want to have grid lines that are not 1 second long. So I guess one of the arguments for this is going to be this. And I could try to come up with something sensible. Or I could give this as a parameter to the user of the waveform drawing. I think I'm going to give this as an argument to the user of the waveform drawing because it will be hard to make something that is sensible in every scenario. So let's add another parameter. And right now we are computing this in terms of how many lines we want to draw, but perhaps it would make more sense to ask about the gap. How long do you want the gap to be? So I will not ask about this. So this would be like, I want to have 7 lines or something like that. But I will not. I will just ask, what is the duration of the gap that you want to display? So from the user's perspective, from the person using the component, they will have to say what is the duration of the waveform display, and then they will have to say what is the duration of the gap. So if they have something like 5 seconds, and I want a line every second. Yeah, I think that this is the best way of going about this. And here we have the coordinates of the component. Here we have the duration, some things that affect the waveform, and then we'll have a bunch of colors in the end. No, I can group by component, like one component is the grid, one component is the waveform, or I can group by sort of functionality. This is affecting what is displayed and this is affecting how it is displayed. I think I'm going to divide this by component. So I will ask for the duration or the grid duration in milliseconds. And while we are here, it's so easy for me to just ask for the grid color and opacity. So I will right here, I will pass the grid color and opacity. And then when I'm calling this, I will have to pass this argument. So let's bring this to the bottom. And this is getting out of hand. Then we have 3 new arguments. The first is the duration in milliseconds. The second is the second and third are the colors and opacity. So I will do dash. And I just added arguments, so nothing should break so far. And something broke. GFX line 30. Oops. Somehow I got rid of commas. That's better. And these are X and Y. These are width and height. And these are also related, color and opacity. Line 38. Hang on. Ooh, spooky. So when you're declaring a function, you can have trailing commas. When you're using a function, you cannot have trailing commas. Oh, isn't JSFX a treat? Okay. Because of this discrepancy, I am starting to think that perhaps I should not use trailing commas, because they can be confusing. No, I like trailing commas. I will keep them. It's a shame that we cannot have them all when calling functions, but at least we can use them when they're available. All right. Let me commit this fix, and I will also add a slider for the grid duration. And what is a sensible value for this? If you're going at 300 milliseconds, you might want to have like 3 grid lines. So I will give you 100 as the minimum, 1000 as the default, and as the maximum. If you have 10 seconds going around, you probably still, you may want to have grid lines up to 2 seconds. Whatever. And do I want to change this in steps of 100? Yeah, sure, why not? And that's that. Look who's here. Bo is here. Hello, Bo. I'm doing good. And you? All right, now let's actually use this argument here on the computation, and then we should be able to use the other slider to move the grid around without changing the waveform. So how is this going to go? I guess I first need to determine how many lines I will have, because that will be relevant here. Oh, in fact, look at that. This is only relevant here, so I might as well just take this line and put it there. Because then they're friends. Nothing broken so far, am I right? One of the sliders went away. I guess I forgot to change this number. See, I'm breaking stuff when I am making the simplest changes. All right, so now we move this slider, nothing happens, but it should happen. Something should happen. Huh, fun stuff. Where are we? We are here. We need to compute the number of lines. That is now dependent on the duration as well as on the duration of the grid. So if I have a duration of 5 seconds and I want to have a grid line every 1 second, plus 1 on the right, I think that should do this. Let's give it a try. Yep. Isn't this looking great? That is amazing. And the whole thing about fractional numbers is it seems to be just working. So I probably the... Oh no, this, we should have a floor here. But if I do the floor here, then we'll have an issue. Yeah, it's always dividing the space equally. And that's an issue. That's incorrect. So perhaps I just don't take the floor. No, taking the floor is the correct move here, because the number of lines that we are going to draw is an integer. We are not going to draw half a line. So this makes sense. What does not make sense is the way that we are doing this computation. What is the length of the gap? Well, it will have to do with this division, but only incidentally. And it will have to do, well, it will have to do with these variables. And it will have to do with the length, but not with the number of lines. So how much is this gap? I guess I divide by the duration and divide and multiply by the grid duration. Let's see if this makes sense. How wide should be a gap? It should be the length. Yeah, divided by the duration of the whole thing multiplied by the duration of the grid. It seems to make sense to me. Let's see if it works out on the page. Yeah, okay, it seems to make sense because now you can see that this gap here, the first one, is not as wide as the second one. That seems to make more sense for me. And perhaps this jump of 100 milliseconds is too much for me to make sure that this is making sense. Yes. Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Am I consistent in not having a space here? Let's look for all occurrences of local. Oh, it seems like I am. Oh, I'm not. It seems like I'm not. Yep, I'm not. But it should be. Now I am. Do I have any local space? I still have one more. Okay, now I'm consistent. Fun diversion. All right, where are we? Waveforms. Oh, check this out. My old to-do list. Sync the scrolling of multiple waveforms. We tried that. Use redraw instead of bleeding. We are doing that. Do the decimation on the audio thread. We are doing that. Oh, and we sort of have a way to zoom. Cool stuff. I guess what next thing we are missing is some labels. I think that we need to draw a label here up top saying what the grid line is. And I think it makes sense to draw the label to the left of the grid line itself. Let's see what the oscilloscope is doing. Nope, not this one. It is a derivative of the Cocos one, but I want to look at the original one. So it's doing the label on the right. Well, that's perhaps because doing a label for 0 seconds isn't necessary for real. Yeah, let's get rid of this on the right. So how many lines do I have? This many lines. And then where do I start? This is my grid main. That is now going to be different. And it's going to be based on the length of the gap. Because if the first one is here, then I need to know to jump this much. So I need to know the gap. Okay, so I guess to know the gap, I will need to move these guys up. And now I can, because they're not depending on anything that comes in here. Or they're depending on the main length. Oh, yeah, well. Let's move the lines into where they need to be. And this line repeats. I'm okay with that. What is the gap? This line also repeats, but it happens to repeat because we need this to have occurred already. Okay, I'm gonna break this apart in two parts so that stuff doesn't repeat. And here's how I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna copy and paste this. I'm going to get rid of the parts that repeat. Then I will move this up. And then I will do another one of these, get rid of stuff that I have already above, including this. And that should do it. Let's see if the order is consistent. And the order is consistent. And there you have it. Why am I making all this? I said that I was going to do labels. Oh, I'm doing this because I'm getting rid of one of these. Okay, I remember. I'm getting rid of one of these lines, this line. Okay, so all of this was so that I could get rid of that line by, when I'm drawing horizontally, the grid is going to start at minus grid gap. And when I'm doing the vertical one, plus, no, not this one, plus grid gap. Then I have already fixed this number. I've removed a +1 from there. And then the increment is okay. I think I'm going to extract this logic. If I am vertical, I do that. And if I'm horizontal, I do that. Is this a huge win? I am not sure. But at least gets rid of that conditional. No. Let's backtrack. I don't like that. I will get rid of the increment stuff. And I will have the conditional right here at the top of the loop. Perhaps I will even do the conditional outside the loop. Why am I doing this, you may be wondering? I'm doing the conditional outside the loop because conditionals are expensive, so if I do them in the loop, I will be doing them a lot more often. But also, I think that this line has a conditional. This line had a conditional in there. I just extracted, but it's coming back. So it seems like, and I was thinking that even the label position is going to be different. So most things about the drawing is going to be different if you are in vertical mode. So we might as well just have it as separate blocks. And then incidentally, I will have to copy the loop setup, but that's okay. So I am going to copy the vertical drawing here. the horizontal drawing there. And in both situations, I will have a line that reads like this. And when I'm doing vertical, I want to add a gap. And when I'm doing horizontal, I want to subtract a gap. All right, with all of this line and that line that we can barely see, but it's there, those lines are going to go away. Oh, it worked. I was expecting an error, but it worked. All right, let's commit what we have and give this a quick review, and then we'll be out of here. I'll maybe not have the time to do the labels. Now I am checking the order of the variables again. Perhaps the checking of the order of the variables should be the last thing I do, but I don't know. I'm just doing it in the middle of the process, I guess. Yeah, everything in here seems okay. Let's try to do the labels. They shouldn't be too hard. And we'll do the labels to the right of their lines. So we already have drawn a line. Let's do the horizontal one first, because it's always easier. So we print. And print is just one of those functions that wants all arguments. It's a whole lot of arguments. So let's copy the list. First off, what do we want to print? We want to, okay, I have to explain what's going on here. So this is going to be a formatting function. This is an argument that it's just a dummy string because we are interested in the return of this, which happens to be a string as well. I don't think it's documented, but people use it this way. As printf assigns its result to the first parameter, it's an output parameter, but it also returns the string. So you can use it like this. I learned this a couple days ago. What is that we want to display? We want to display a and that's where it gets difficult. I don't know if we want to display this in terms of seconds or milliseconds. I think that in the oscilloscope, they have this in terms of milliseconds, and then as you go down, it switches to seconds. Perhaps that would need to be another parameter. Oh, and another interesting thing to note is that their grid lines are fixed. What changes is the labels. Even if I make this bigger, no, if I make this bigger, then we get more grid lines. So in our version, we are changing the length of the grid lines. They have a fixed length to the grid lines. All right, I'll take it. But let's start with seconds. So we are going to have a fractional number of seconds. Something like this will do, I think. And what is this fractional number of seconds? Oh, we actually need a variable for this. And it will be around this loop, so it will be line after line main. grid main label. And now we need to know, in order to have this label, we need to know what the gap is in terms of milliseconds, I guess. We currently have the gap in terms of pixels. So let's take a moment. I guess I will not comment out. Let's take a moment to rename stuff. Yeah, this is the gap in pixels. But we also need the gap in milliseconds. And what is the gap in milliseconds? Oh, hang on, that is the argument that the user has provided, isn't it? Yeah, it is. The user is saying I want a line every 200 milliseconds, so we don't need this variable. It's given to us the whole time. Silly me. So the first grid line will be at this point, and then at the end of the loop, I will add that much. Yeah, there is one line repeating in both loops, but I guess it is what it is. And there will be a bunch of variables here that will also repeat, but the x and the width and the height will not repeat. Yeah, right, so we are doing this in seconds, so we need to take the grid in milliseconds and divide by 1,000. And I only want two positions. I forget how to use this. Floating point number, minimum of 4 digits. Always show sign. Okay, I think I will have 1 digit like this. This is in seconds. All right, let's do the rest of the arguments. Perhaps we can borrow something from somewhere else. Oh, I know a place. Frames per second. We'll have a print here, and we can borrow some of these arguments. Yeah, the default font family. Extra small 2, bold, widest, all that seems good. Align to the left. That makes sense because my grid lines are here and I want to align to the left. That way, align to the top, overflow visible, color. The color can be the same as the grid color. And then the position. I want to, this is the X position. And the Y position, I want to be the cross plus just a little bit of space. Let's give this a try. All right, it's not working, but it's looking okay. We probably want to give a little bit of space to the right of the line as well. Like that. Now there's the problem that it is not incrementing it. The label is not working fine. Oh, that's because I have the wrong variable there. And now it is looking okay. So when I change this one, the grid lines are the grid lines are changing, and the duration on the grid lines is changing as well. And when I change this one, the grid lines are changing, but the duration is not. That's the perfect behavior. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I'm recording bass. You're recording and watching? That's remarkable. Gotta admit that it's a bit hard to follow the coding. Yeah, I must imagine. I'm not that much of a bass player, so if I'm playing the bass, I'm sweating bullets. All right, could we do some more work to measure this space and prevent the overlap? We could, but I think it's on the hands of the developer to find sensible values, or even on the user, because we do have that little work in progress thing that is going to be similar to the inline input viewer. And for that, I will give the user all the controls here. So I will not bother with measuring spaces and whatnot. But there is something else that I will do, and that is to add the labels to the vertical version. And then we will wrap up. I promise. Pinky swear. Right. I will want to move these guys around a bit because it's overlapping here with my frames per second counter. So I'll add an X that is going to start at 100. It's going to go from 100 to 500, or perhaps it's going to be even more. It's going to be like 200 in steps of 10. Yeah, okay, so I can move these guys around now. And naturally, I did this because it was overlapping with this, and the labels are going to come here on the left. Alrighty. I guess the only thing missing is this print for us to do it. All right. Let's do this. The thing that is going to be different is these coordinates. We want this coordinate, we want to draw the label above. That's what they do, right? Yeah, they draw the label above this line. I bet that this line is not even showing up on the stream because it's so faint. But anyway, the label is on the top. So we want to do minus the height of the text. But I guess I would just minus some space. So perhaps a space of 1. And on the cross axis, I will do just a little bit of space. So just like this will probably work. Look at that. It's not going well. Oh, hang on. The main coordinate is the y-axis. Yay. Except that I don't have enough space going up. So let's try space of 4. And there you go. That's a bit much. And there you have it. Yeah, that's it. We did grid lines on one axis, the easy axis. We'll do the grid lines on the hard axis, the dB axis, tomorrow probably. Meanwhile, let's see. We're opposites that way. I can multitask a bit while playing, sweating bullets when coding. I am sweating bullets when I'm coding too. All right. Thank you, Bo, Andres, and Theo for being here on the chat. Thank you everyone else who is watching this. I see you back here tomorrow, and we'll do the labels on the other axis, the dB axis. Have a good one. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.